Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with your information for Tuesday, July 28th. We have a lot of games on the slate today. There's a 30-game slate going on tonight and a couple big tournaments around the industry. There's a lot of stuff that you want to look at. There's a few good pitchers that are on the mound that we're not going to be targeting against. We'll get to those later, but as always, what we like to do in our section here is give you guys all the pitchers that are on the mound today, figure out what their weaknesses are, and then try to figure out which bats on the other team profile best against them. What we like to do is try to find the guys who are in the best spots. This way we can make a short list of players that we want to look at further and put into our lineups later on tonight. Obviously, when lineups come out, you're going to get some of those cheap value options. You're going to see a couple guys that are moved up in the order. And a good mixture of some of these guys who are in the best spots and a few of the good value plays is what has been working lately and helping us get some pretty good rosters that have been making us some money. So since the idea here is to put together a winning roster and to win some cash, this is the basic building blocks that we try to use to put together those rosters today. So the first guy we're going to talk about is Yohan Flande. He's a pitcher for the Rockies, left-handed pitcher going up against the Chicago Cubs today. And he's only pitched 16 innings in 2015, so there's not much to go on. But if you look back at his numbers last year, he allowed a .294 batting average to right-handed bats. Not really a ton of home runs allowed, but he also didn't pitch a lot of innings, so I don't really put too much stock into that. The one guy on the Cubs who really profiles well against him is Chris Bryant. Bryant had that monster game-winning home run last night, has a .366 WOBA with a .246 ISO number. So he is a guy that has a lot of power and is somebody who could be in a good spot here today to go yard again against Flande. I haven't looked at it yet, but as always with Wrigley Field, you got to make sure you take a look at the wind. If the wind is blowing out, that would give an upgrade to a guy like Bryant. If it's blowing in, then you got to kind of temper your expectations with him. His price has come down, which is a good thing because he used to be up around the $5,000 mark, one of the most expensive third base options we had. But his price has crept back down, so where he's like somewhere between like 6th and 9th on most of the sites. So he is a guy that could be in play, especially if he's cheap wherever it is that you're playing today. Next guy we can talk about is Chris Capuano. Capuano's a left-hander going up against Texas. Right-handed bats have hit .308 against him with 5 home runs and 19 innings pitched. Now, when I was looking at the Texas team, there's absolutely nobody on that team that stands out to me today. Nobody with over a .360 WOBA, over a .200 ISO against left-handed pitching. Texas really, really struggles against left-handed pitching. So you're not looking at the guys like Fielder and Moreland that you usually do. Even a guy like Rougned Odor, none of these guys are really all that much in play to me today. So as much as I don't like Capuano and I think you can attack him, I just don't see anybody that I want to use on that Texas team. Again, if there's some guys that you see when lineups come out, right-handed bat, getting a good lineup placement and you want to take a flyer on him, I don't think Capuano's a great pitcher. I wouldn't, start him today thinking he's going to have a good game, but I just don't see anything that stands out to me. And when we're trying to do this, we try to get guys that stand out that you can put in your cash games. And there's nobody that really screams, oh, this is a guy that needs to be in your cash game today. So even though it's a weak pitcher going up that has a weakness with right-handed bats, if there's no right-handed bats that really stand out to use against them, you just got to kind of pass on it. And that's the way I'm looking at this game today. Next guy, there is a lot of bats that we can take, and that's Adam Morgan against Toronto, up in Toronto. Now, listen, Morgan's a left-handed pitcher. He's allowed right-handed bats to hit .296 against him with 5 home runs and 20 innings pitched. Toronto is one of the best teams in the last decade against right-handed pitching. Their entire team from top to bottom has a lot of power. Everybody in that order can go yard. Everybody in that order can get hits. Everybody in that order mashes left-handed pitching. And I don't even know, to be honest with you, I don't even know if Tulo is going to be there today. But if Tulo is up there and he's in the game, he's just another guy who mashes left-handed pitching. So this is going to be an absolute bloodbath for Adam Morgan. And I think that this is a game that a lot of people are going to stack. Just looking at the numbers, as you know, we usually like to look at a .360 WOBA and a .200 ISO as the threshold. The list of guys is more than you could even put on one team. You got Josh Donaldson, 441 WOBA, 325 ISO. So he's obviously one of the best plays on the day, one of the top options. He's expensive, but, basically he mashes left-handed pitching, and he has for his entire career. Chris Colabello, 416 WOBA, 255 ISO. Russ Martin, one of the best catching options today, 405 WOBA, 226 ISO. Devin Travis, one of the best cheap second base options, 397 WOBA, 232 ISO. Danny Valencia, 364 WOBA, 153 ISO. One thing I want to mention about Valencia, I know people automatically say, oh, they're playing a lefty, put Valencia in. But if you look at that number, 364 WOBA, 153 ISO, it's good, but it's not great. It's not like this guy's an automatic start. Obviously, for a guy who's a cheap salary saver, those are some very good numbers. But I don't think that you automatically have to put Valencia in your lineup because he has huge upside against left-handed pitching. Again, he does have upside against left-handed pitching. I'm not saying it's not a good matchup for him, but it's not a great matchup for him. He's not a guy that's 400, 300 and is guaranteed to hit you a home run. He should pick up a couple hits. He has a little bit of power, but, not a ton with a 153 ISO. That's not a huge number. Even Joey Batista. Joey Batista has a 363 WOBA with a 185 ISO number. So he's got more home run power, obviously, but I don't think that he's going to be worth the $5,000 price tag they want to put on him. Edwin Encarnacion, I think, is going to be very, very popular today, but his numbers aren't amazing against left-handed pitching. His WOBA is only about 331. He's actually kind of struggled a little bit this year, so I would temper my expectations a little bit with him. And then obviously the last guy is Tulo, 412 and 208. If he's in the lineup today, he's been mashing left-handed pitching his entire career, so he's another guy that you have to look at. So that's basically 8 guys that I just gave you. And as you know, even if you're playing on DraftKings, the most you can stack is 6. So you're going to have to pick and choose. I definitely think Donaldson is somebody you want to use. I think Russ Martin is one of the best catching options, so he's somebody that you might want to use. As for the rest of the guys, though, I mean, like I said, pick the bats that you like the best and put them in there. If Tulo's in there, he's definitely somebody I would use. If you're playing on FanDuel, that's 3 right there. So you got to figure out which guy you want to be your 4th bat. But again, the entire team mashes left-handed pitching. I think this is a really tough spot for Morgan. I actually like the kid. I think he's pretty good, the young left-hander from the Phillies. But this is just an impossible matchup for him. So I don't think that I think you can target a lot of guys against him. Definitely wouldn't be using him. And I think it's going to be very popular. So if you're playing in a GPP today, if you're playing in a big tournament, I think fading some of these guys is probably the way to go, because I think that the ownership is going to be crazy. If you're playing in your cash games, there's no sense not having some exposure to like a Donaldson or a Martin. It just doesn't make sense not to put these guys in your lineup. The matchup's just too good. Let's see. The next guy we can talk about is Mike Pelfrey. Pelfrey's pretty much had reverse splits for the last 3 years. Right-handed bats this year are hitting 307 against him, but he hasn't given up a lot of home runs. So he has been keeping the ball in the park, limiting them to a lot of singles and doubles. The only guy on Pittsburgh who really super stands out to me is Andrew McCutchen. He's got a 379 WOBA with a 208 ISO number. Again, it's not the greatest spot. He does have a good matchup, but McCutchen's a guy who, even in good matchups sometimes this year, has been going 0 for 3 or 0 for 4 with a strikeout or 2. So I don't love him today as a guy that I would spend up on. There are much better options, I think, that you can spend up on your money for. If you find a site where McCutchen's cheap, then yeah, I think he's a pretty good play. But I have yet to find one of those sites where he's cheap. So I don't think he's going to be somebody I'm using today, even though he does kind of stand out a little bit. Next guy we can talk about on the other side of that game up in Toronto is Felix Dobront. Right-handed bats are hitting 344 against him in limited innings this year. But even if you look back over his last couple of years, excuse me, right-handed bats have been the way to attack him. There's a couple righties on that Phillies team that are interesting. You got a guy like Carlos Ruiz, the catcher. He's hitting 458. He's has a 458 WOBA with a 258 ISO number. So those are pretty good power numbers and a pretty good solid WOBA for a guy who's pretty cheap on most of the sites today. Again, you can't ask for a better hitter's ballpark. That game's taking place up in the Rogers Center. So I think that Carlos Ruiz could be a good swerve off of Russ Martin in the same game and give you some pretty good upside against a pitcher like Dobront. You got a guy like Darren Ruff. I've never been a huge Darren Ruff fan, but the guy's got a 441 WOBA against left-handed pitching with a 216 ISO number. Those are really good numbers. You can't really sleep on him. And again, he's another guy who's really cheap. Depending what site you're playing on, some places he's first base eligible, some places he's outfield eligible. I think on DraftKings you can use him on either or. So there are ways to fit him in your lineup. He's a good salary saving option today. And he does tend to hit in the middle of the order whenever they do face left-handed pitching. The guy who I like the best on that Phillies team today is probably Maikel Franco. He's got a 274 WOBA with a 374 WOBA with a 240 ISO number. So those are pretty good power numbers from the third base spot. Again, like we said, Donaldson's going to be incredibly popular today. So if you're playing in a tournament, you can save some money by going with a guy like Franco. And I think that the matchup is just as good on either side for the right-handed third baseman going up against these left-handed pitchers. And then the last guy, just somebody I'm going to mention, I mention him all the time, is Cesar Hernandez. He has a 384 WOBA against left-handed pitching. It's a little bit tougher for him to steal bases against the lefties, so that kind of knocks him down a little bit. But again, if he can get a hit or two, he's like 2,800 every day on DraftKings. I don't understand why they don't raise his price. But again, if they're going to give you a gift, you take it. You don't look a gift horse in the mouth. The other day, we talked about him when he went up against Chicago, how he was in a good spot to get a stolen base against Schwarber. He got on base. He stole second. He got knocked in. He scored 10 points. At 2,800, he got you 3.5, 4 times value in one at bat. So that is what he's capable of doing. Even later on in the game, when they bring in the right-handed reliever, you know, if he gets on base, he's always looking to steal. He's always off to the races. So if he's still cheap on whatever site you're playing on, I think that there's a little bit of merit to using him today as well. Next guy we're going to talk about, the pitcher for Arizona, Godley. Left-handed bats he's been very limited. He's only thrown like 1 or 2 games in the majors. So I look back at his minor league numbers. He was in Double-A for most of the year in the minor leagues, and left-handed bats have been the guys that have been doing the best against him. The one matchup that I think you can look at here is a guy like Nelson Cruz. Even though it's a righty on righty matchup, Cruz is still 375 WOBA and a 222 ISO against right-handed pitching. And I'm not a big fan of this kid Godley. I don't think he's a huge prospect. I don't think he's all that great. He hasn't shown me anything that makes me think I don't want to target bats against him. So I do like Cruz a little bit today. The other guy who profiles best against him is actually Robinson Cano. Cano, just on the numbers, only has a 343 WOBA and a 182 ISO number. But in 7 of his last 10 games, he's had over 10 DraftKings points. And during that 10-game stretch, he's averaging 14.8 DraftKings points per game. So he's definitely somebody who's starting to pick it up. I had heard that they got a new hitting instructor, and that new hitting instructor had coincided with Cano dropping into the 4 spot, and also this current streak that he's on where he's starting to hit the ball a little better. So sometimes it's just a little adjustment in the swing, a little something that was off, a little different approach to the plate that can change everything around. And it seems like Cano has gotten to that point where everything is changing around for him. So even though we stayed away from him most of the first half of the year, I think he's a guy that might be back in play for us now. The Yankees are going up against Martin Perez. Perez is a lefty, struggles with right-handed bats, limited innings so far this year, but right-handed bats are hitting over 400 against him right now. When the Yankees go up against the lefty, there's 2 guys that you automatically think of. You got Chris Young and his 456 WOBA with his 309 ISO score. And you got Alex Rodriguez with his 430 WOBA, his 363 ISO score, and 4 home runs in his last 2 starts, all against left-handed pitch. Well, 3 of the 4 against left-handed pitching. So A-Rod likes hitting against left-handed pitching. He likes hitting in Texas. And lately he's been on fire with the home runs. So there's really no reason to fade this guy. Again, his price is up on most of the sites. You're not going to find him cheap anymore. But if a guy keeps hitting home runs, I mean, how are you going to argue against him? He might not be the A-Rod of old, but, he's got 21 home runs already this year. He's hitting close to 300. I mean, I don't know how much more you can ask for this guy. Whether you like him or not as a player, whether you like him or not as a person, as a fantasy option, he's somebody that you definitely like because he has been producing. Next guy we could talk about is Charlie Morton. Morton goes up against Minnesota. Left-handed bats have been the way to get to him. They got a 301 batting average. But again, when you look at this Minnesota team, I mean, who do you take? What left-handed bats do you want? Do you want a guy like Joe Mauer? Fine, maybe a decent cash game option. Doesn't have a lot of upside. Hasn't been hitting a lot of home runs lately. A cheap option, you could look at a guy like Eddie Rosario, who's in the 5 or 6 hole for that team. Again, another left-handed bat, a little bit of pop, a little bit of average, but neither one of these guys are great. I don't think either one's a great option. If you're playing on a site like Aces and Rosario's still like $4,000, okay, he's a decent cheap salary saver you can put in there to get him in, to get in some of the big bats. But other than that, I really don't see anybody in this game that I'm really looking to target heavy. Let's see. Next guy we can talk about is Chris Young from Kansas City. Chris Young, the pitcher, not Chris Young, the batter that we spoke about. He's got a low batting average against both sides of the plate, but he has given up 14 home runs already in 94 innings pitched. His problem has always been that he's a fly ball pitcher. That's basically what people have said about him. But when he plays in Kansas City, it's a tough park to hit home runs out of, so it really doesn't hurt him all that much. This game, though, is going to be in Cleveland, a little bit easier for home runs to get hit out, and he struggled a little bit more with left-handed bats in his career. So you got a guy like Michael Brantley who's starting to heat up. We spoke about him last week. He's starting to see the ball better. He's a little bit healthier. Right now, his WOBA is 365. His ISO score is only 162. But again, when this guy gets hot and this guy's right, he's a top 20 hitter in the league. So I think that he is hitting better, and he is somebody who I think we should put on our radar. Again, I don't think that his numbers are all that great so far, so I think that he'll fly under the radar a little bit. But Brantley's got huge upside, and in this matchup, he's got a huge chance for a home run as well. The biggest home run threat on this team to me is also Carlos Santana. He's only got a 354 WOBA, but he's got a 233 ISO score. Like I said, he's probably got the most power of anybody on this Cleveland Indians squad. Probably be batting in the 4-hole today against the right-hander, and I definitely think that he's somebody who's in play. You can look at a guy like Jason Kipnis if you want to. He's got a 427 WOBA, but a pretty low ISO score of only 176. Now, here's my problem with Kipnis is his price is just so expensive, and he doesn't have a ton of home run upside. So if you're going to pay for a guy like Kipnis, you really need him to basically get you like 3 hits or steal a base, or he's got to do something, because if he's not going to hit a home run, it's very tough to get those points that you're going to need. I mean, he's close to $5,000 on DraftKings, over $4,000 most of the time on FanDuel. I mean, you're going to need a monster game out of this guy, and without a home run, it's going to be tough to get value out of him. Although, like I said, it is a pretty decent matchup. My thing is that Young doesn't give up a very high batting average to left-handed bats. He gives up a couple home runs, but his batting average to both sides of the plate is pretty low. So I don't think it's a great spot to expect to get multiple hits out of a guy like Kipnis. And there's just so many other positions where I'd rather pay up. I think that, it's just not worth it to pay up for a second baseman that doesn't have home run upside, or is a very good bet to steal a base if you're playing on a site like DraftKings, where the stolen base is really going to help you out. Let's see. The next guy we can talk about is Matt Cain. Matt Cain's going up against Milwaukee. Right-handed bats have a higher average and a higher home run rate against him, so he's a little bit of a reverse splits guy over the last 3 years. But this is actually a pretty good matchup for him. He's at home in San Francisco, which is not a very good hitter's ballpark. You got Lynn and Braun both likely out with back injuries from carrying this offense for the last 2 months. That basically leaves you a guy like Carlos Gomez, whose WOBA this year is 341. His ISO is 168, so that's nothing spectacular. The guy who stands out the most on the numbers is probably Chris Davis with a K, and he's got a 365 WOBA and a 206 ISO. So again, not really anything that's super spectacular. I would like to be able to target some of these guys against Cain, but I don't think it's a good ballpark to target against them. And if you got guys like Lynn and Braun that are out, I mean, I just don't see anybody who stands out to me as the guy that you have to have in this matchup. And I'm perfectly okay just passing it along and not taking any of these Milwaukee bets. Next guy we can talk about is Iwakuma. Left-handed bats have done better against him. He's allowed a 270 average to them over the last 2 years combined. This year, he's allowed 10 home runs already in only 43 innings worth of work, and he's allowed 5 to each side of the plate. So while the averages are not very high, he does allow some home runs. To me, that means a guy like Paul Goldschmidt's going to be in play. Goldie's got a 431 WOBA, 245 ISO number against right-handed pitching. Even though it's righty on righty, he's the guy with all the home run power for Arizona. So he's the guy that I think profiles best against a guy like Iwakuma. As far as left-handed bats to use against Iwakuma go, you can look at a guy like Jake Lamb if you want, but he hasn't really been doing what people had expect him to. He might be a guy who's going to fly under the radar. You can get low owned that can give you a cheap home run, but I don't think it's a very high likelihood. It's definitely more of just a tournament option if you need a salary saver. David Peralta is probably the best bet. He usually either hits in the 2-hole or in the cleanup hole. He's got a 367 WOBA, a 233 ISO number, so his numbers are actually pretty good. Again, this game is in Seattle, though, so Seattle's not a very easy place to hit home runs out of, and it's not like Iwakuma's a gas can. This guy's been a pretty solid pitcher. He was injured for a little while, so he's still kind of just rounding himself back into form. Again, I think you can take a guy like Peralta, but I don't think he's one of the best options on the day. We got C.J. Wilson going up against Houston. C.J. Wilson has been tougher on right-handed bats in 2015, although he has given up 7 home runs to him. But normally, right-handed bats is the way to go after him. If you look at his numbers from last year, right-handers hit 277 with 15 home runs against him. So if you're going to take anybody on this Houston team, you want to look at the right-handed bats. There are a couple right-handed bats they have that do very well against left-handed pitching. The first guy to mention is Carlos Correa, probably one of the best options today at shortstop. 395 WOBA, 288 ISO number. It's very tough to get some home run power out of the shortstop position. If Tulo is not up in Toronto in time to play in that game tonight, I think Correa is clearly the #1 option at shortstop, and definitely somebody worth paying up for, because I just don't think that anybody else gives you the kind of upside or the kind of consistency that this guy has. And again, he's hitting in the 3-hole, got a chance to drive in runs. He can go yard. He can steal the base. He can get multiple hits. This kid, if you haven't seen this kid play yet, he's legit as a rookie. He's going to be something special. Next guy we can talk about is his battery mate, his double play partner, Jose Altuve. Altuve's got a 391 WOBA. Doesn't have a ton of power with only a 157 ISO. But remember, this is a guy that hit over 400 against left-handed pitching last year. So he can rack up multiple hits for you. He can score some runs. He can steal some bases. He's a legitimate threat for them. The last guy, this is the guy who's going to be the salary saver, the guy who kind of flies under the radar. When they've been playing left-handed pitching lately, they've been putting Marwin Gonzalez in the 2-hole. Gonzalez has a 367 WOBA with a 190 ISO number. So he's got some pretty decent numbers. His numbers are, click off the threshold boxes that we look at here today. And like I said, he bats second, so he's going to be sandwiched between Altuve and Correa. And I think that he's pretty cheap on most of the sites. So if you can get a guy that's pretty cheap that has really good upside, that's the kind of guy that you want to put in your roster. I think you can stack up some of these Houston bats. Like I said, I definitely use Altuve and Correa. If you put Marwin Gonzalez in there, or then take one of the big boppers behind them, most likely it'll be Evan Gattis hitting in the cleanup spot today. I don't think that's the worst idea for a stack. I think it'll be a little bit lower owned than you would expect it to be. Again, that game's in Houston, really good hitters ballpark, and I think there's a lot of upside to look in that way today. Let's see. The next guy we're going to talk about is Dallas Beeler. He's a guy for the Chicago Cubs that they brought up to eat up some innings. Going up against Colorado today. Left-handed bats have been over 300 against them in 2014 and 2015, and limited innings in the majors. But even if you look at his minor league numbers, left-handed bats have been the guys who have been doing better against them. First guy that jumps right off the page is Carlos Gonzalez. What can you say about this guy? I think he had 5 home runs now in his last 5 games or something like that. He has a 418 WOBA, has a 308 ISO number. He's just been absolutely on fire. He's got multiple hits in like 5 of his last 6 games. He's expensive. He's probably one of the more expensive options at outfield today, but he has completely turned it around from his early season struggles, and basically raised his numbers up to pretty solid levels in about a week with what he has done lately. So you really can't argue with using this guy. He's got 40 DraftKings points, 30-something DraftKings points the last couple days. He has just been absolutely carrying fantasy offenses, and I think you'd be silly to go away from him today. His teammate Charlie Blackmon, 383 WOBA, 192 ISO. He's another guy that's in there. Blackmon got pulled early from the game the other day. I don't know if it was because they were just blowing teams out or because he's banged up a little bit. So just keep an eye on that and make sure he's in the lineup before you roll him out there. Somebody who I think is going to fly a little under the radar is Nolan Arenado. Arenado has been mashing right-handed pitching this year. 388 WOBA, 339 ISO, has over 20 home runs against righties. And again, with everybody paying up for Donaldson today, if you're playing in the tournament, you can make the swerve from Donaldson to Arenado. He'll be very low owned because I think everybody's going to be, using that money on a guy like Donaldson. And again, he's got the huge upside. He's probably one of the best hitters left on the Rockies right now. And I definitely think he's somebody that can help you win a tournament today. Corey Dickerson is another guy you can look at. Again, he's back from injury, so he's not 100% yet. At least I don't think he is until I see him start doing what he did before the injury. I'm going to be a little cautious, but he does have a 370 WOBA and a 223 ISO number. So again, he's another guy that's in play. Next guy we can talk about is Willie Peralta. Willie Peralta is a right-handed pitcher for Milwaukee. Left-handed bats have a higher home run rate against them and a higher batting average. So on San Francisco, the one guy who really stands out in that case is Brandon Belt. 377 WOBA, 222 ISO. Again, that game's in San Francisco, though. Not a lot of runs get scored there. Not an easy place to hit home runs. So I'm not jumping for joy to put this guy in my roster, but I do think Belt is probably the best option. I'm not a big fan of Peralta as a pitcher overall. So I think you can also use another left-handed bat like a Joe Panic, or even some of the righties like a Hunter Pence or a Buster Posey, Matt Duffy. I think they're all in play. Again, my biggest concern, though, is what kind of upside do these guys have in San Francisco, which is not the greatest hitter's park. Next guy we could talk about, Wade Miley going up against Oakland at home in Fenway Park. Right-handed bats are hitting 267 against Miley with 9 homers and 89 innings pitched. So that's solid, but nothing spectacular. You look at that Oakland team, there's not one guy on that Oakland team against left-handed pitching who has I'm sorry, he's not going up against Oakland today. That's Brett Anderson's going up against Oakland today. So you got we got Miley going up against the Chicago White Sox. Sorry about that. I had that written down wrong. So Miley's going up against the White Sox. Again, there's not one guy on that White Sox team, though, who has a WOBA over 360 and an ISO over 200. The top bat is probably a guy like Jose Abreu. But again, he's not having a great season either. So while I would like to take some bats against Miley, Miley's been kind of solid, and there's really nobody who stands out. What we're trying to do here is find the guys who stand out to give you guys the best upside plays to use in your cash games, and also, you know, guys that you should be building as your anchors in your tournaments. If there's guys that you're going to be reaching to take, then it's not really what I want to do here. So again, nobody on the Chicago team really stands out as somebody that you want to take. Now talking about the Oakland bats, we got Brett Anderson of the Dodgers going up against Oakland. Right-handed bats have hit 281 against them this year with 9 homers and 75 innings pitched. So you got a guy like Josh Phegley behind the plate. I don't like the fact that they dropped him down to the 6 and 7 hole, but his numbers are really, really good. He's got a 396 WOBA, 236 ISO score. Again, he's had a couple big home runs against lefties recently, so I think he's somebody that's going to be in play. You always got to worry with this Oakland team about, you know, double switches and stuff like that, because they do play it very, very much by the sabermetrics book, where if a right-handed pitcher comes in and it's late in the game, you're probably going to see a guy like Phegley get pitch hit for, because he's not as good against right-handed pitching. 2 other guys you can look at. Ben Zobrist is not in a bad spot. He's been hitting in the 3 hole for this team lately. 376 WOBA, 141 ISO. So he's not a big home run hitting kind of guy, but he is somebody that can rack up a few hits, get on base, and he's somebody you don't have to worry about getting pulled because he hits from the right side and the left side. So he's definitely somebody who's going to be in there, and I think he's in a pretty good spot today. If you want to use him as a cheaper shortstop, if you can't afford Correa, I don't think that's the worst way to go today. But again, I'd still rather have Correa. I just think there's so much more upside there. The other guy that actually stands out surprisingly is a guy like Brett Lowry. He's a pretty cheap option. WOBA's 364, ISO numbers 219. So he's got some power and he's been able to get some hits. He could be a sneaky option to put in there. Definitely somebody I'd include if you're stacking up the A's today, but also just a cheap salary saver if you need to find a cheap guy so that you can fit somebody else in, some of the studs at the other positions. Let's see, we got Ubaldo Jimenez going up against Atlanta. Ubaldo's been so tough at home that I'm not really looking at anybody on this Atlanta team. Ubaldo has been known to give up some home runs from time to time. Again, though, who do you really want to take in this Atlanta team? I mean, Freddie Freeman maybe, but do you think he's completely healthy? He's really the only guy that kind of stands out a little bit. And even then, Ubaldo's actually struggled more with right-handed bats. A little bit of a reverse splits thing going on for him as well. So I don't really have anybody on this Atlanta team that I'm targeting. Like I said, Freeman's probably the best option, but I'm not really in love with him today. Next guy is Mike Leake. Leake's allowed left-handed bats to hit about 267 against them with 10 homers and 70 innings pitched. So the 2 guys that stand out on St. Louis when you're looking for left-handed bats, you got Colton Wong, fresh off his grand slam from yesterday. Now, I wouldn't expect him to do that again, but he does have a 363 WOBA and a 194 ISO number. And the other guy who's just solid, safe, consistent cash game play is Matt Carpenter, 371 WOBA, 182 ISO number. And, you know, those are really the 2 guys that I think you can attack a guy like Leake with. There are a couple decent right-handed bats on that team who might be able to do well, but nobody who really stands out. You know, if you want to use like a Randall Gierchuk or a Matt Holliday, you won't get any arguments from me, but I also don't think they're the best plays on the day. Let's see. We got Julio Teheran. Teheran surprisingly has been horrible against left-handed bats this year. They're hitting 308 against them, 7 homers in 52 innings. Again, so I think there's a couple guys on Baltimore you can look at. You got a guy like Jimmy Paredes, who's a 350 WOBA with a 183 ISO score. You got Chris Davis with the C. Again, his WOBA's a little low at 339, but his ISO at 250 means that he's a home run threat. Like I said, Teheran's a guy who's been struggling with the left-handed bats. So those are really the 2 guys on Baltimore I would look to attack him with. Manny Machado has been very, very good, but he's actually cooled off over the last couple days. So I don't know if I want to mess with a guy like Machado today. But, again, his numbers, even righty on righty, he's like 388 WOBA, an ISO in the mid to, the mid 200s. So he's been a stud since they moved him to that leadoff spot. We got Jordan Zimmerman going up against Miami today. Left-handed bats have hit 296 against him, but he hasn't given up a lot of home runs. Only 4 home runs in 60 innings pitched. Derek Dietrich is the guy I want to talk about today. 399 WOBA, 260, ISO number. I mean, this guy is mashing right-handed pitching. He's a left-handed bat. You can use him usually at second base or third base, depending on what site you're playing on. On Aces, I think he's a second base shortstop eligible guy. And he's very cheap. I think he's still below $4,000 over on Fantasy Aces. So he makes us a great salary-saving guy to throw in there so that you have the money to pay up for the stud pitching or to put like a Donaldson or a Trout or somebody like that in your lineup. I think Dietrich is a great way to do that because he's been solid and consistent. He's getting you a couple points, and he does have that home run upside, which he's flashed. He flashed it in his last game. He's flashed it a couple other times already this year. When you get Dietrich against the righty, he's definitely got a guy that has the power to take him yard. One guy who I'm not using, despite the numbers showing up good on him, is Justin Bour. Listen, Zimmerman's not a big home run guy. If you're using Bour in a lefty-righty matchup, you're usually hoping for a home run out of him. He's been making a lot of outs lately. His numbers have been plummeting. At one point, he had almost a 400 WOBA. His WOBA's down to 356 because he hasn't been hitting well lately. His ISO number is still pretty high because he's basically swinging for the fences. If he makes contact and hits a home run, he's a good play for you. So if you want to throw him into a tournament as a high upside option, that would probably be the only place I could recommend using him. But again, think about it. If you're going up against a guy who only allows a home run every 15 innings to left-handed bats, is that really the kind of guy you want to use Bour to attack? I'd much rather use Dietrich, who's a guy who can hit for power but also hits for average, and is the same kind of price, if not cheaper, at a position that's a lot easier for you to punt and get away with. When you take Bour at first base, you're really hoping that none of the big first base options have a big day that hurts you, and that's a pretty dangerous thing to do. You're kind of playing with fire when you do that. Next guy we can talk about, Colin McHugh. McHugh is somebody who struggles more with right-handed bats. He's facing the Angels today, so that's not really a good thing. He's allowed 9 homers and 64 at-bats this year, and a 306 batting average to right-handed bats. So that means that you got the 2 big right-handed bats from the Angels squarely in play today against a guy with some reverse splits, and they're both in a pretty good hitter's ballpark down there in Houston. So I could see a home run coming from one, if not both of these guys today. You got Trout with a 431 WOBA and a 314 ISO, and you got Pujols with a 385 WOBA and a 292 ISO. So these 2 guys, Trout especially, has been absolutely on fire lately. Neither one of them is really cheap. Pujols is a little bit cheaper than Trout is, but I think that both Trout and Pujols are in a great spot. I think Trout might be my #1 overall option today at the outfield position, and maybe my #1 overall option, period, at any position. So he's a guy that I'm going to be putting in there and building a lot of my lineups around. So that basically takes care of all the guys that we want to target against today. There's a couple other pitchers I just want to go through and tell you guys why I'm not targeting against them. Jeff Samardzija has been great lately. He's at 230 DraftKings point starts in his last 4. Last time out, I think he had 24 or 25. He's averaged over 20 DraftKings points in his last 5 starts. Definitely just not a guy that I want to take a lot of bats against right now. He's been pitching pretty well. Same thing goes for Jake Odorizzi. So far this year, 250 batting average or less from both right-handers and left-handers. So again, there's nobody that really stands out. Trevor Bauer has a low batting average allowed, but a lot of home runs allowed this year. That's been his drawback. But Kansas City's not really a big home run hitting team, so I don't know if there's a lot of bats on Kansas City I really want to target against him. James Shields plays against the Mets. If I have to explain to you why I don't want to target anybody on the Mets, then you haven't been paying attention lately, because that offense is horrendous. Shields hasn't been great. He's actually come back down to earth from the 8 to 12 strikeout guy he was earlier in the season. But I still don't really want to target anybody on the Mets. I know they traded for a couple bats, but who other than the pitching on the Mets, who do you really want to target? There's no bats on that team that really jump out to you as guys that you have to play. Jamie Garcia is coming off the DL and facing Cincinnati. Now, I don't know what to expect out of him. He's been a pretty decent high K guy in his rehab start. I think he went 5 innings, struck out 6 or 7, and he's been pretty good this year in the majors. But, he's a lefty. Who do you want to target? Do you want a guy like maybe a Frazier? He's probably the best bet, the best option. Maybe you can use a guy like a Phillips, but I'm not going to be using the left-handed bats like a Votto or a Bruce against them. Like I said, I don't know who to target against them. So he's another guy that is in that category of I'm not targeting him as a pitcher to use, but I'm also not really targeting against him today. And then that brings us to the big four. Sonny Gray's going up against the Dodgers. Sonny Gray's been great this year. So even though the Dodgers hit right-handed pitching pretty well, not really going to mess around too much with that matchup. You got Syndergaard going up against San Diego. San Diego's been horrible. Syndergaard's looked like the god of strikeouts lately. So, he's a guy that I think you got to leave in play. Jose Fernandez has come back and has been pretty damn good. Again, you got to watch with the innings limit and the pitch count with him. But he's facing Washington, who hasn't been good, even though they do have Rendon back now. So that's another bat in that lineup. But I still think Fernandez handles him for however long he pitches. So I'm not really looking to target a lot of guys against them. The last guy is David Price going up against Tampa Bay. Now, this could be a tough spot for Price, mostly because Tampa Bay hits left-handed pitching pretty well. You got a guy like Logan Forsythe, who we mentioned the other day, 400 WOBA, 300 ISO against left-handed pitching. But he's not the only one. I mean, even guys like Joey Butler, Evan Longoria, there's a lot of guys in that lineup that actually are right-handed bats that hit left-handed pitching pretty well. You got the whole narrative street thing with Price returning to Tampa Bay and all. So, again, I don't know if I really want to target him. But I think that there's a chance that they could actually get some runs against him today. So I wouldn't be surprised if Tampa Bay scores some runs. I mean, we know how Price goes. When Price gets through the first inning, he basically goes 6 or 7 innings, strikes out 8 or 9 guys, and looks like every bit the stud that we know he can be. But every once in a while, he struggles to get out of that first inning, gives up 3 or 4 runs. And I think if he lets a base runner or 2 on and makes a mistake to a Longoria or a Forsythe, one of those guys could take him yard, and they could be up 3-0. Tampa Bay could be up 3-0 in the first or second inning of this game. But again, I don't think it's something that I would really target on either side. So that basically sums it up for the bats today. Kind of gave you guys an idea of some of the guys in the best spots, some of the guys that you want to make sure you put in your rosters. Remember, this is only like the first step of the process. You want to wait and see when lineups come out later. You want to, look at some of the other factors that are involved. You want to compare some of these guys, like, is this guy in a better spot than this guy? Is his price better than the price I can get on this guy? Are these two guys similar, but one guy's price is, very expensive on one site and very cheap on another site, where, you use them in one place, you don't use them in the other place? This is just the first step of the process for you. That's why we try to get this video out early in the day. This way you can start making that short list and then narrowing it down when you finally do get to tonight and start looking at the guys that you want to put in your roster. So like I said, there's a lot of games going on tonight. Make sure you get into some of them. If you haven't signed up yet, come over to rotocurve.com. A lot of good things going on over there. The community's been growing, by leaps and bounds over the course of July. We're very happy with it. We started putting up some of our football content. You can see some of Rath's college football videos are up. I threw up a few NFL videos. We got a bunch more on the way. Josh has been doing some tools as well, some NFL and some college football stuff. So you're seeing a lot of stuff that's starting to get up on the site. Make sure you get over there. Make sure you sign up. Start earning those curve points. Trade them in for some cash that you can use on the sites, or trade them in for some swanky Roto Curve swag. Either way, whatever you decide to do with it, that's up to you. You get points for participation, and we want to hear your voices. We want to hear what you guys think we can do to improve. We want to hear what things you like about the site. We want to hear what things you guys think we can do better. So that's what it's all about. We're here to serve you guys and, try to help you guys get over that learning curve. So thank you for joining us for the Benny's Bat section today. You can follow me on Twitter at BennyR11. You can follow RotoCurve over at RotoCurve, or like I said, come over to the rotocurve.com site and sign up for it. So like I said, there's a lot of money out there tonight. Good luck, guys. Make sure you go get it. And as always, stay classy, DFS.